My name is Drew, and I'm the Aspiring Master, and welcome to the Aspiring Master Presents. This is a show where we talk about the meanings, misunderstandings, and insights about the important words we use and misuse on a daily basis. Really understanding what we're truly meaning when we talk allows us to convey and explain ourselves better to others. This not only allows us clearer communication so we can get what we need quicker and with less stress, but also helps us understand ourselves in more depth than we thought possible. Today on our show, we have our special guest, Therese Wilson, who, like myself, is a practitioner, instructor, and advocate for personal growth and cooperative awareness. Today, we're talking about the word expectation with all its different connotations and meanings. Let's get to it. So, here we are talking about expectation. What did you expect? So, are you ready?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So, expectation. So let's go to Merriam-Webster as per usual, just because we just love educating people from the Merriam-Webster dictionary. Uh, I go to the root word expect because expectation is to expect, obviously. Um, so we've got a number of definitions here. I'm going to go through the first three are just in number one, so they basically all relate to each other. So it's like 1A, to consider probable or certain, to expect. Uh, B, to consider reasonable, due, so basically you're entitled to, or necessary. And number C on this one is to consider bound in duty or obligation. Okay. So that was the first definition, and those are all the related definitions. And you got to love how the dictionary basically says, well, we're going to give you a framework that's this huge thing, and you're going to have to define what you mean by yourself in there. So the second one is to anticipate or look forward to the coming of an occurrence. The coming or occurrence of is what it says. So there you go.
Okay.
Well, I mean, we can go through the consequences of expectation, but let's take a look at first off what we kind of treat expectation as, right? And I think that anticipation has to be in there somewhere because anticipation comes with expectation. If you're expecting an outcome, you have an expectation that an outcome will happen. You have a lot of the times it's anticipatory because you are anticipating that this is going to happen. So when your dad says at the end of you mowing the lawn today, you're going to get $5, right? Okay, and I'm talking in 1980s money, so basically $80. Um, so at the end of that, so you're out doing the lawn and you can hardly wait until you're done because you're going to get your money, and that anticipation is sort of an integral part of the expected payoff, right?
Well, that's one of the uh, uh, maybe one of the facets of it, but that's not what expectation is, because expectation ends up with if you don't get that dollar,
Right.
you're really upset. It's not well. If I get the dollar or not, I'm doing a good job.
Mm.
It's none of that. There is anger in some form if you don't get that dollar. That's the expectation. That's the part of expectation that sets you up for failure. You get all anticipatory, you look forward to it, and then what you expected to happen doesn't happen, then there's a whole different emotion comes in.
Well, and here's where I see we get lost in the expectation of an event. If you said, let's say, you said, Drew, I'm going to be on this call at 1:30 your time, right? Now I've got an expectation that you're going to be there, right? And it's a reasonable expectation. It's something that you've told me was going to happen. That's your intention. Now, one of two things can happen depending on how I define expectation, right? Expectation to me specifically is somebody says they're going to do something, and that's more likely to happen. And there's the difference between it's going to happen and more likely in this case. So in my mind, I go, it's more likely to happen. That's cool. And I might even anticipate it. But I also know that in that ratio, life happens. And it could not happen in the end of this. So I don't put all my eggs in one basket, I guess would be the best way to say that, in the fact that I don't emotionally invest that it should be happening, and that if it doesn't, it is somehow a crime. I guess would be the
Well, crime, of course, is a little strong,
yeah.
but now being on the other end of that scenario,
Mhm.
where someone does not show up, especially habitually doesn't show up at the appointed hour, then I know that I personally move into some level of anger, because I feel that they think that my time isn't as valuable as their time.
Mhm.
My life doesn't mean as much as their life, by simply, and usually it has to do not with not showing up, but not with taking the time to let me know they're not going to show up on time.
Right.
There's all kinds of levels of that go with expectation, for sure.
Well, I too think that, I mean, you triggered a memory in me, because when I was working for my stepfather, he is probably one of the busiest men I know, and he owned a construction company. It's not really a construction company. It was just basically a general contractor. So he hired out jobs and did a whole bunch of stuff. Well, he would say, I'm going to show up there, be ready by 1 o'clock this afternoon. And so I'm ready. I'm waiting for 2 hours,
Yep.
and getting more and more frustrated. Right. Eventually, I got to the idea of, well, I mean, and it's quite obvious that he does not consider my time to be as important as his. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just good to know, right? So what I eventually did in that situation was, instead of getting frustrated, I just understood, based on my past experience with him, that this isn't going to happen. So I told him right up front when he says, "Okay, be ready at 1." I said, "That's great. If you're not here by 1:30, I'm out." Right? And that's okay, right? I don't care if I miss it,
Then,
you
then,
know.
then I'll stay with him too, more than likely.
Generally, I think that initially no, but yes, later.
Those kind of parameters being set and agreed upon, then I still think it's disrespectful.
Well, and of course it is disrespectful in regards to, and here now we've got to go and define what respect means to each of us individually. This is going to be another show, but it's always nice to know how to define that for yourself, right? If I am full of self-respect, that other people don't respect me doesn't bug me. It really doesn't. It in If I'm wounded in an area, I know that this is, I'm talking about my personality. I'm not talking about how everybody else deals with, but I know that if I'm wounded in an area, and I find somebody disrespectful, that means that I need some kind of acknowledgement in that area that I'm not getting, and I'm relying on them to give it to me. And so, on the level of respect,
With regards to being timely or not, I suppose it could have something to do with that, but mostly it means to me that I could have been doing something else, but I dedicated my time to you.
mhm,
Then you should respect the fact that I dedicated that time to you.
mhm. Well, I mean, and here we're talking about that form of expectation of, because we have that expectation, we have that disappointment, right? Right. And so we're actually equating, even when we're talking about respect, we are expecting respect in regards to how we define it.
And actually, if you can indulge me, I wrote
Sure.
a poem about that kind of
Sure.
a while back. May I?
Yeah. Absolutely.
It's called Night Lies. I have been deceiving myself, which is the biggest lie of all. I told myself worldly goods matter little to me, having them nothing but something nice. What others can give me unimportant, no charge for service rendered. Lies. My currency demanded is more subtle, but equally hard to earn. If I am good to you, a good deed you'd better return. If I bestow on you some goodness, pay with a smile, I demand. Be good to me as I am to you. Your own life way and creation not respected. Knowing I am not the only one with this black market soul economy does not make it right or easier to bear. It instead tells me I am part of the problem, following the sheep trail to destruction. I shall shine my light on me, turn my darkness into day. Perhaps you will see my solitary bright beacon and turn mine into ours. Our light can grow, surround this earth, save it from the us of night lies, turning those lies to sunlit truth told to ourselves.
Nice.
And I have actually been working on that. The doing for others, doing whatever, being whatever, only for me.
Mm-hmm.
Doing it because it is the right way, if you want to use that word, the way that works, and not expecting something in return in any form. The smile, the thank you, the whatever. Just doing it because you should be doing it is hard to do sometimes.
No,
Hard
and
to do sometimes.
yeah, no, I agree. Absolutely. It's when I take a look at that, because as you're talking, it, I noticed the other day when I was editing videos that I look very stone faced when I'm listening to somebody, and so I'm not reacting. You don't see a lot of emotional reacting on my face, and I was going, I know that comes across as something different than it is. What I'm doing is I'm internally grasping your words and comparing it on a feeling level to things that are going on inside,
Hmm.
right? So when you're talking, I'm like, compare. Oh, yeah, that fits right. It's like in how I'm feeling about uh, what you're saying.
Doing things just
Yeah,
because you should be doing them and not because you expect anything in return, even if it's that subtle, emotional return.
right. Okay. And
And it's
what I was thinking about is how actually I've been described as one of the most giving people by friends, and part of it is I give out of the sense of it feels good to give. It really does. I've convinced myself that giving is a really cool thing to do. Um, and I don't just give to anybody. I give to people that I know will utilize the things that I'm giving, right? Or at least I do give to other people. Obviously, I give money to this and that, but the ones that are closest to me, the gifts that I have are because I can do them. I'm capable of doing them, and I'm also saying at the same time as, hey, I like you, right? And so those gifts, the gifts of my time, the gifts of stuff that you may need, they're not a demand. I don't have any transactional thing because I get fulfilled just by giving. Um, and that's taken me a long time to get there because I was part of that transactional giving and expecting a return, right? Like tying this into our expectation, that expected return that I'm giving you something you should return, like your poem was saying.
and of course, way back in high school, I had a class where we were asked, no big question, what is the nature of man? you know,
Oh, yeah.
and back in when I was 16, 17 years old, I said the nature of man is selfish, but I didn't mean it the way most people might.
Mhm.
It has to do kind of what we're talking about now. Um, the nature of man is selfish because if we didn't get some kind of fulfillment in giving, then we wouldn't give.
Mhm.
But as we've talked about in all the different words we've spoken of, if that fulfillment doesn't come from the inside out, if you are not getting that feeling within yourself and expecting someone outside of you to give you that feeling by thank you or hug or whatever, or repayment in kind in some way, then you're missing the point of my kind of selfishness. It is absolutely an internal selfishness that just likes that feeling of giving, and if and that feeling is absolutely there every time I give something. So I have to make sometimes a conscious remembering after the fact when someone doesn't react in the way I expect, and know that it's got to come from here.
We place our emotional self-worth on an outcome. Now that sounds kind of silly or funny, but it's true. We all do it. We say, oh, well, we expect that John will be here at 5. Well, John doesn't show up until 5:20. Now by 5:20, now you're agitated, angry, and all of that stuff. And now, you just don't have a good time with John.
Is insidious in all of our lives. I think maybe because I think probably our laws are based on how we expect our communal society to behave. Our religions are certainly revolved around the way we expect whatever central authority figure in that religion has been purported to expect us to behave or to do or to whatever. Expectations are a limiting thing to me. And that will eventually get us out when the subject evolves a little bit into the difference between expectations and preferences, of course. And the what one does creatively and the other one does not. But I think expectation is insidious and is part of our problem right now in this world, perhaps.
Well, and I think that we're also taught to expect. Of course, being the centrist that I am, I don't want to say wrong. That we're taught to expect incorrect things for us. Do you understand?
Wrong things. We're taught to expect things that don't work.
Yeah. Well, again, that's that whole idea of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. And that's what we're talking about on some levels, right? It is kind of insane how we do that. Now, truthfully, I can't say with any confidence that there's not a time in my life that I don't have expectations, and there's not a time in my life that I don't invest emotion into the expectations, right? So it's less, I think, now in my life because I've worked on it, but I still have those things. Like I still have some expectation of reciprocation from somebody else. And when I talk about reciprocation, I'm going to define that. That's a coming back. So to be reciprocal is back and forth, right? So for those people that don't know what that word is.
And yeah, and in truth, when you have no expectations, and just give or have a situation evolve as it would, eventually that reciprocal thing is going to happen. It might not happen in kind, the actual thing or event, but the energy of what you're putting out always comes back somehow.
Well, and here's something that spiritualists talk about, and since you brought it up, I'm going to really take a little bit of a closer look at it. When we talk about, well, the energy goes out and it comes back around, people would ask me what that really means. And for me, what I understand is I have, far fewer expectations than I see many of my peers. And yet, So because I've let go of needing the outcome, right? I just go, well, I understand, and I just flow with whatever comes up, and I just change with it, right? Oh, that expected outcome didn't happen. I'm not sitting in my thing going, oh, well, that outcome didn't happen, so I expect it to come back around later. Again, we're getting caught in that expectation loop, right?
Use a word that absolutely goes along with expectation, and that's that word need.
Hmm.
Need for a specific outcome is more what I feel expectation entails,
Hmm.
rather than and are we into preferences versus expectations yet?
Oh, sure. Go wherever we need to go, babe.
Preferences versus expectation. Expectation, the way I put it for a while, is it's saying, I need this to happen, putting on blinders and working your way towards that thing, but missing all the other possibilities of how to get to that thing or how to get something similar to that thing that may actually be better than that thing you say you need and expect to get. If with preferences, you say, this is the thing I would prefer to be, I mean, to get or have uh, happen, but I'm just going to move towards it in the way that I know how, but I'm open to suggestions. I'm
Right.
open to little detours. I'm open to having it happen in a different way than I think it might happen. So many people, when you have expectations, you shut out all the other things, and it doesn't happen, but it could have.
Right. There's always more than one solution to a problem, and so when
Yeah.
we're talking about expectation, right? I expect it to be solved in just this manner, right?
Yeah.
Um, that that we get locked into, right? Like we stop understanding that expectation is really more preferential than it is a solid block of steel, right?
Get locked into it because that's what we're taught. Um, I One of the things that I did right as a mother was, with one daughter in particular, if I said, uh, "Can you do this?" And I'd show her what to do, and she would go, essentially, "I'll do it, but I'm not going to do it your way." What I basically told her was, "As long as you get it done, I don't care how it gets done. Good girl. You were thinking for yourself."
There's that interesting thing about controlling a situation too, the
Yeah.
expectation of you should do it my way. I ran into that when I was working for Eagle Hardware, which is no longer in existence, when they first came to Canada, and I was on the night crew, and we got all our work done. We were insane, right? We had a really good crew of people. We all were very independent. We were all introverts, which helped. So the guy would just give us a job and we'd go do it, right? He's not hanging out and looking over our shoulder. As long as the job got done, he didn't care. The same thing with our night manager, who was works in the daytime, said, I don't care how you guys do it. If you guys get the job done, then take the rest of the night off and play hockey in the back. I don't care, as long as the job's getting done, right? Um,
Exactly.
and and that freedom that we had in that situation, in contrast generally to the day managers who said, you must do it my way because you're in public and you reflect on me, right?
Right.
So,
And don't get me wrong with my daughter though, because there
mhm,
were times when I'd say, "Little one, do it my way," and we'd have something of a fight. And part of what I would tell her is, sometimes I simply know how to do it better and faster. And oh, by the way, the real world, when you get a boss, isn't
mhm,
always going to let you do it your way. Sometimes you have to learn to just do what you're told. Sorry, child.
mhm,
Most of the time, it was, uh, I'll do it my way. Okay.
mhm. Well, and I mean, and again, doing it my way is always a learning curve, uh,
Sure.
for whoever's doing it. I mean, I may know that there's a way better way. I loved my stepdad, who I was talking about earlier. uh, did that with me. I was thinking about it the other day because I was watching a little thing on how to put stripes. They've the new way to put stripes down on the road, and instead of painting it on, you've got these heated plastic things that melt into the stuff. And I'm like, oh, that would have been so great because I had to paint a handicap sign and all the stripes in a little driveway
Yeah.
to for people to come and park at this pharmacy. So we were doing this job, me and another guy, and we're there with our paintbrush and we marked it all. And he left us to figure it out, right? Like he didn't tell us to do anything. He just said, "You guys figure it out," right? And he was doing it because he was teaching us a lesson, right? So it was fine. We did it. We got it done. Took us like 3 days to do, hand painted. And then he looked at it and he said, "That's a really good job. Why didn't you guys use a roller?"
I was going to say,
Yeah, right. Well, I mean, I was 17. I mean, what do I do, right? Um, but why didn't you guys use a roller? And because he did it that way, I learned that lesson.
yeah.
If he had done it a different way and he was just being an ass about it, um, I wouldn't have learned that lesson. I would have been rebelling against that lesson. And so, like you say, there are times to be able to do that, to have that say, I expect you to do this my way because it is faster, quicker, and we need it done right now.
And for me, oftentimes, of course, not sometimes my ego, of course, would get in and just do it my way, little
Yeah,
of
yeah, yeah.
course. But but it was also my way is the safest way. If you're 5 years old and you don't know about safety on a stove, you do it my way.
As a parent, you you know, you have to judge whether it's safe enough for them to be
Yeah,
able to experiment, right?
in the realm of expectation.
Yeah.
It is the expectation that a parent does what is best for the child, and
Mhm.
at the very least keeps that child safe.
Well, and here's where we run into some interesting problems around expectation. Is because we all learn different expectations as we grow up, which is a like absolutely normal. We were raised in different households. We were really raised in different religions. We were raised in different upbringing. We were raised with abusive fathers or great fathers, abusive mothers or great mothers, right? So it's we have all of these jumbled up expectations
So
that
how we ever get along at all is a
well,
miracle.
it is. I mean, one of the reasons why they created laws and all of that stuff because they saw that people were so diverse. How do how do you herd cats, right? So when we're talking about this, the expectations. Like, I mean, I if I were to say that I had a preference, which is basically how I use expectations these days.
but,
Um,
but that's different.
it is different, absolutely. I think that we're too rigid on our definition of what expectation is. I think that we get so emotionally involved with the outcome, right? Because and I'm going to kind of outline this why we do that.
That emotional involvement is the expectation part
Well,
to me.
but it's a self-worth issue, really. When it comes right down to it, I do not feel worthy, and so therefore the outside world must confirm my worthiness, right? If I'm angry at something, if
No, no,
okay,
no, because sometimes it's simply a matter of I really do know more,
hmm
so I
well,
expect you to do it my way because
oh, when we're talking in context with children and teaching, that's a different version of what I'm talking about. When I'm talking about an expect, so I'm going to move to I'm talking about I expected to get candy at the end of this, right? I expected to get a reward, or I expected, you know what I'm saying? I have an emotional expectation that says this should be happening, right? That need thing that we're talking about.
there's that should on yourself. Yes,
Yeah.
okay.
So when I feel an expectation and it must happen in order for me to feel better, that's what I'm talking about.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
we get locked in that.
Interlac, yes.
Yeah. So and what I find is the majority of expectations that I see out there when you're being angry, you're taught that this outcome should happen, right? and that there's a need for it, then if it doesn't happen, if you react, right? And I'm not saying that it's bad to react. We all do it. I have expectations where I go, dang, that was supposed to happen, and I'm disappointed, right? That we're talking about that setup for disappointment, that emotional involvement in an expected response or reaction or reciprocal thing. But if I stop and I just go, I totally get why that didn't happen. Let's move on, right? You know, or I'll make my aim over there.
Yeah,
Okay.
or sometimes you just go, oh well, we
Yep.
just have to do it again.
Expectation is sort of a foregone conclusion. Now, what I find is we expect a lot as people. I've found that the reason that people get mad at me is because they expect me to behave a certain way or to do a certain thing or to be a certain way. Right? I had a singing instructor who was a failed singer, and she had an emotional expectation from me when she was instructing me that I would move ahead and become that. I was her star student because my potential was so great. And so she had these huge expectations of me, and when I did not meet them, she wanted to fail me. Right? Okay. So I find that kind of expectation just tears things down. I find that expectation is not something that I find hugely positive.
Well, and I'm actually going to get down back to a point I was making earlier around spirituality. It's not necessarily spirituality, but the energy comes around, goes around idea. And there's a lot of people that hear that and they go, "Oh, you're being spiritual." And I said, "Well, my experience is, and this is my experience around it, is I go, okay, I'm going to get that." I'll give you an example actually of the other day. I went out and got a remote control car to be able to mount a camera on to do something very specific that I was after. So I went online, I looked at Amazon, and I said, "Oh, there's a remote control car. That looks like the kind that I want. It's only like 36 bucks. I'm in." So I get it, and I get it here, and I start taking it apart because I have to adapt the top so that I can set the camera on it and stuff. And I start taking it apart, doing this, and then I finally look at the remote control, and I go, "Oh, this is a single speed. I can't do that. I can't have a single speed. I need a variable speed."
Oh no.
Right? And I go, "Oh, crap. Okay, well, no, I totally get it." And I just know that to get things right, you fail a lot, right? I just understand that and I accept it. I said, "Oh, I'm not sitting there beating myself up of, oh, you should have looked. Oh, you're silly. Now it's torn apart. You can't send it back." It's like, okay, well, there's $40 of my money that I have to put towards this. And I'm not rich. I'm not poor, but I'm not rich. That $40 is still a decent little price. So I went online and I looked at our used sites and I just like, "Oh, there's one right there. It's got a variable speed. That's exactly what I want." It was only $20, right? I'm like, "Yeah, that's awesome." Here I am expecting a little thing like this. I get something that's this big, right? Right? And I go, "Okay, well, I can still work with that." Right? It's not a big deal. And so I get it home and I take it out and I look at it and I said, "Okay, so where's the charging port on this?" And I said, "Oh, there's a battery underneath it." And it's like, "Oh, it's a nickel cadmium battery, which is the old rechargeable." And I'm like, "Oh, okay, well, I'm going to have to try and get another battery for this. And hey, where's the charger?" He didn't give me the charger, right? So there's no charger with it. And I'm like, "Ah." and I look at myself and I just go, I know that that's through my own failing to get things done and really paying attention to what I'm doing that is that. But I also accept that about me. I'm going, okay, that's one of my fatal flaws sometimes, that I get overexcited and I grab stuff. So now I'm into this $60, right? And and so I look it up and I said, well, maybe I can buy a new charger, a new battery, which is fine. Nope, they don't make them anymore for this thing. So it's just like literally $20 worth of garbage. I'm not going to take it back to the guy and said, you did me wrong. I wasn't paying attention. I take responsibility for my own purchases. I'm good. Um, so then I go out to Costco and I buy the $99 one, which if I had done in the first place, I wouldn't have wasted the extra $60. But the process of me doing that, if I had a major amount of expectation before, could you imagine how disappointed? Because I've certainly, as a younger man, I've certainly done that, where I've picked it up, I've got it, I do that, and now I'm really pissed off at myself because, or if I'm pissed off, I'm usually take responsibility, so I'm pissed off at myself. But how I've seen other people, they'll just take this toy and they'll throw it against the wall and they'll step on it, and I've certainly done that in the past. And say it's the company's fault, they should take it back or whatever, right? Um,
Yeah.
that expectation is not there. So that story is all about understanding that everything's flexible. And
Yeah. Yeah. I guess my expectation of situations like that in my life, because I've certainly had many of them as well, is uh, connected with actually firsthand knowledge that what you described was the next time you have that kind of a purchase to make, you'll read.
yeah, well, I mean, that's the learn.
You will be more careful. Everything that I have done wrong has informed me of something that will benefit me later on in life.
Mhm.
So that I agree. I don't beat myself up anymore. Um, and when I came upon the concept of not right and wrong, but works and doesn't work, that was for sure, and that's Neil Donald Walsh in Conversations with God. That's for sure when I stopped beating myself up because I didn't do anything wrong. And if I look at it as I just did something that didn't work, then I have the wherewithal to stop uh, having the expectation of perfection in me and the expectation of when I do something wrong, I'm going to have to beat myself up. Then I can simply look at what more objectively at what didn't work and say, okay, now what? How do I do this differently?
Well,
You know,
that brings up another point about punishment and consequence, right? Um, where I when I was growing up and I figured out, I knew that I was the cause. So I at a very early age I understood that I was the cause, right, of my life. I was the cause. I was the causal factor of the things that were happening. And like, I mean, I had the way I interpreted the world, how I did things, and how those things failed. And when so initially I was beating myself up all the time because we were taught as children that if you are doing something wrong, right, you get punished. And so we turn into self-punishing people because there's nobody else around to punish us anymore, right? So we're self-punishers. Um, Now, as I grew and started to understand myself better, I started to understand the difference between uh, the not, punishment and consequence, and started to really ex- accept the consequence and
something
not.
versus some just the natural outcome of an action. Yes.
Yeah. And so I accepted the fact that there are consequences to my action. And knowing full well, walking into a lot of situations, I go, I don't know what the outcome of this is. And this is talking about releasing expectation, really. Um, so I walk into a situation. It's sort of like right now, I'm into changing my entire career in the midst of COVID-19 because my career has been decimated. And so I'm changing my entire career. So I'm at the edge of this going, okay, how is the best that I can do this? And I recognize there are going to be so many factors to this that I don't know, right? So I don't place an expectation of I'm going to be a YouTube star or I'm going to be the best videographer that you've ever seen or I'm going to shoot the best B-roll. I am going to do my dangest to do the best that I can with as good a careful preparation, knowing full well that I may fail.
Yeah. I get you in my own way. During all this, I'm experiencing something very similar with the cancer. Um, I know full well I may fail, chemo and everything else. I may die. But in the in between, this cancer is being given me many opportunities to touch other people in ways that I never would have in the past. It's also talking about the energy, it's given me ample proof that what I have put out over the years is coming back to me in surprising ways. People with loving things that I never expected. Um, a friend of ours uh, gave me, just insisted that I had to choose a lamp that I liked. And he sent me this beautiful lamp with dragonflies on it and like Tiffany glass. Uh, uh, just because, and so and because I had no expectations with the people who are now demonstrating these things, I never expected any of this in return, and here it is. But life, period. If you just open to the magic of it and not happening in a certain way, it's that preference says you really would like it to happen that way. That's what you're envisioning. But if you expect that, then I think you're also not giving fully from your heart. I'm saying this a little bit wrong, but I think
You're not
preference.
really being true to yourself, I think, is what you're saying.
So, or being fair to others,
Mm-hmm.
because you're not allowing others to fully be themselves and have input into a situation, or it stifles the creativity in the entire group involved in whatever that is.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a certain outcome in business that you have to have. Okay, I get that. We're going to create something, but just exactly how that comes about doesn't necessarily have to be done in any certain way.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that speaking of releasing expectation, and we get caught in the trap because we're like, what comes around goes around. The energy that we put out eventually comes back to us. It's talked about in religious sense. It's talking about in spiritual sense. In the reality of it, yes, if we throw some energy out there, it may return.
Well, it will.
Well,
When and what that energy looks like is something if you have an expectation of it, then it might not happen.
Well, I
But
mean, generally, I mean, and this brings me to another point about expectation. And one of the things that a real big lesson that my mom taught me around expectation and how you miss out when you're doing it. So I remember my mom was just hitting the edge of her career. She was just stopping being an interior designer and moving into old age, I guess would be the best way to put it, but moving into the next phase in her life around that. And she would love to have had a man in her life, right? And we went on long walks and talks, and we talked about exactly that. And she says, "Ugh, if he owns a dog, I can't do it," right? And that expectation. And I told her, I said, listen, you understand that by saying that, you've now limited your view of the world to the point of men without dogs, right? And the guy that's perfect for you that just walked by with his dog is not on your radar. And I said, so you formulated this expectation of what should be, and there's that expectation. This is rigidly what should be. You miss out on the entire rest of the vista of energy.
Expectations limit you.
Yes.
Yeah.
And whereas preferences do not.
Preferences do not.
But the expectation builds a box, it builds these walls. Because then you're saying, in essence, you don't love me unless. Right? You don't love me unless you fit into this little box. Right? And that's a box of not only your own making, but your parents' making and all of that stuff. Because they're the ones that demonstrated all this stuff to you. They're, your peers, getting teased at school builds these boxes, everything. The expectations that we hold on one another, we talked about a little bit, we touched upon how expectation is kind of a setup for failure. It certainly can be and is more likely to be that statement. It sets you up for failure. If you expect something and it doesn't happen, you may feel like you failed.
Yeah. And you certainly have feelings of some kind. Maybe sadness is too much for most things, but you certainly have a feeling of some level of sadness if your expectations aren't met.
So that whole expecting thing. What was I was reading something somewhere, and I don't know what it was. Either that or listening to something somewhere about how expectation. You can't get rid of expectation in your life, right? If you do that, then you're hiding from yourself on a level. To say that if you're stopping expecting things just so that you avoid feeling like you're failing, that's the wrong thing to do.
Yeah, no, I disagree with that completely.
Yeah, me too.
Because preferences lend itself much more readily to dreams and vistas of wonderful things happening, and the opens yourself to all those wonderful surprises of life that anyone who's been stuck in a mega focused life, when they get out of it, will go, oh man, I missed that. They'll be so focused on work that they missed the family, they missed the kids growing up, and at the end of their lives, how often have we had these wise people who suddenly turn wise go, I had an expectation of how life was supposed to look, but I missed out on the things that really mattered.
Right.
We put expectations on others in so many unrealistic ways that stifle their dreams, and the things that who they really are will create don't get created because someone else's expectations of who we are supersedes. And I think that's a huge danger in expectations, because it's not just for ourselves, it's we project those expectations onto others.
Well, and when you're talking, my brain goes, well, I understand too that we sometimes place expectations, say, on our children, because those were unfulfilled expectations we had of ourselves or our parents had of us, and there went our expectations right on to our children. And unfortunately, many times the child can't fulfill those because they're, of course, a different person.
Yeah. The how many times in old Hollywood in particular, the stage mother, who couldn't make it in vaudeville, so their children become child actors and they push through everything. We knew about it more then. Even now, there are examples I can think of that the parents totally ruined their children because they were living their dreams through their children. And That's the expectations.
Well, I mean, with the challenges that expectation brings, right? Like, I mean, I actually, when we talk about expectation, and I think about my wife and um, I know that my wife got married to me because it was an expected thing, right? I'm not of the kind of persuasion that says I need to formalize that commitment because I've already got that. I already own that. I'm not running away. It just doesn't happen. I stayed in a marriage for 15 years that was abusive. I mean, I stayed because I said I would, and I said I would do my best to work through it.
Yeah, but
Um,
that also was an unrealistic expectation of yourself.
I agree. At the end I understood that, right?
Just so you know that
I know. I totally agree with you. And
that's
at
the
go ahead.
expectation that can kill you.
Yeah, yeah. So I understood commitment, so I wasn't really worried about getting married. Uh, but because her family expected it, because it was expected from the cultural upbringing that she came from, it was a very big thing for it to happen for her, and she herself, I don't think that needed it either. I don't think that she either had to have it. I think she and I'm talking out of the side of my head here because I really don't know. I haven't really specifically, yeah, exactly. Um, I really don't specifically have that information, but in our conversations, it's been alluded to that part of the reason that we got married was that it would appease her parents and grandparents.
Well, and that's because they expect it, because if they believe what they've been taught by most of the churches, let's assume that they were in church, and this is just something I'm throwing into the conversation. That's because they expect if you don't get married and you just live together, that your soul is going to hell.
There is that.
Um, there are a lot of things that are thrown into the expectations of our parents onto their children that have nothing to do with what the parents really think or believe, or you know, but that the church has told them to believe.
Mm-hmm.
Or government, or whatever, some kind of outside pressure. Of course, when I was younger, I believed what my parents told me to believe.
Mm-hmm.
Most of us do. Unfortunately, we stay with the fear of, if you don't believe this, then there are some pretty serious consequences in this life or afterlife. So we move away from thinking outside that box you were talking about. It's easier to stay in the box. It's easier to just internalize the fear and go along.
Well, it's comfortable, right? I mean, I don't get me wrong. People that need boxes, because there's some people that need boxes.
Sure.
They really do. They
we all need some kind of box in our
well, of
life.
course, yeah. Like, I mean, if we're talking about metaphorically, of course.
Yeah, we all need some kind of structure in our lives. Very few can move through lives with no structure, but when we can't see how that structure is harming us, is stifling us, is limiting us, then there's something wrong with the structure and it needs to be rethought.
Now, on that note, when we're talking about expectation, and we talked about children, and I want to do this on a societal level, because I don't think that expectation is bad. I think that we may be projecting this idea that expectation is bad. I think that in certain situations, yes, it is technically not healthy for us to do, right? It doesn't bring us to a good end, right? So it's not working for where we want to go. In other places, expectation can and is a force of good, and I think that
Give me an example of that.
I think that you gave me an example already. You said, I have an expectation of my child to do this because I'm the parent and I know that in order to do this, the child will be safe, right?
We'll go along with so what could be used. You know, I think it could still be brought under the category of preference and not expectation. Uh, and now I'm going to go really, really esoterical,
Mm-hmm.
because every person,
Mm-hmm.
every soul, if you will, has its own path. And if I have a preference that my child not put his hand on her or her hand on the stove, but not an expectation that it not happen, there's nothing, even in childhood, that soul knows what it is doing.
Mm-hmm.
And are we in some way limiting the soul's journey rather than with the expectation of how that life is to be lived?
Mm-hmm.
And under preferences, we can say, "Oh no, sweetie," and if the child reaches out and puts a hand on again, well,
Yeah.
what was I supposed to do? Knock him upside the head, maybe?
Well, I think that yes, I agree with you in that instant, but I think that if we pull back and say, if we pull our own personal agenda out of expectation, that it's a good tool, because it's.
I admit, and again, I was just being really esoteric.
Mm-hmm.
I get what you're saying in reality, because in reality, until and unless we are all much more enlightened than we are, having certain rules, so to speak, which is what expectations mm-hmm. are,
yep.
Simply to help us move forward in any kind of cohesive fashion in this world, in this lifetime right now, it is pretty much a necessity right now.
Oh, yeah.
in our evolution. I think at some point it will be a no-brainer that we will simply have preferences of things, and things. Evolutionary information isn't just passed on to adults. Mm-hmm. It's also passed down, in children. And I think someday we will have limited expectations, right, and more preferences in our world.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that we both agree, expectation is the way that we're using it is really a big setup for disappointment. It can, I think that it's something that we really have to start doing on a personal level, is looking at it.
Well, it limits creativity. It limits your ability to create the outcome that you prefer in your life.
Right.
It's that simple.